The Picos Desert blazed beneath a sun that seemed forged from pure fire, its heat warping the horizon into a quivering mirage that danced like living water. Silas Bridger rode through the shimmering emptiness with the slow patience of a man who had long ago stopped expecting mercy from the land or from life. At 47, the sun-carved lines across his face were etched deeper than wrinkles. They were stories, scars, remnants of battles no one remembered anymore. His Morgan horse, Rusty, stamped nervously at the sand, muscles quivering beneath a hide dulled by dust. Bridger lowered the brim of his battered cavalry hat, shielding eyes that had grown tired of watching the world break itself again and again. 5 years alone on his homestead had taught him to trust Rusty more than he trusted most people, and when the horse suddenly tensed, ears flicking toward the distant dunes, Bridger felt the warning shoot through him like cold steel. "Easy, boy," he murmured. But even as he spoke, he heard it, so faint it might have been the wind, yet heavy with human desperation. A voice, cracked and dry as old bone, whispering for help. Habit more than thought drew Bridger's hand to his Colt single-action revolver. The weapon felt like an extension of his arm, its grip worn smooth by 2 decades of violence he had tried, and failed, to escape. Following the weak cry, Bridger guided Rusty up a dune streaked with old blood baked dark by the sun. At the top, the sight below froze him where he sat. A lone mesquite tree twisted against the sky like a dying skeleton, and from one of its branches hung a woman. Tall, sun-darkened, muscular, her wrists were bound so tight the rope had carved bleeding furrows into her skin. Her legs were limp, her head bowed, long black hair matted against her shoulders like strips of wet obsidian. She wore what remained of traditional Apache clothing, torn and dust-coated. Beneath her, the hoofprints of several horses trampled the sand, but something else caught Bridger's attention. A symbol scratched into the earth with deliberate cruelty. 2 crossed feathers. His jaw tightened. The Iron Ravens. Bandits. Killers. Slavers. Men who'd once worn army blue under a commander who'd taught them to prize brutality above honor. Bridger scanned the ridgelines for movement. This could be bait. The Ravians were known for traps. But then the woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing a defiant fire even through her fevered haze. "Do not let them see me," she rasped. That plea tore through whatever hesitation remained. Bridger swung down, knife flashing as he cut her free. Her body fell heavily into his arms, burning with fever, yet clinging to life with the raw stubbornness of someone who refused to die quietly. He hoisted her onto Rusty and rode hard across the red sands, leaving the hanging tree behind like a grave marker. Night fell with a storm crawling across the western sky, lightning flickering like distant gunfire. Bridger's cabin, a humble shape of pine wood and stone nestled against a cluster of rocks, greeted him with a silence he had grown too used to. Inside, he laid the woman upon the bed, his bed, the same one where his wife Eleanor had once nursed their daughter through fever, only to lose them both in a single, terrible winter. The memories tightened in his chest as he lit the oil lamp, casting warm gold across the stranger's face. Her skin, normally bronze, was ashen beneath layers of grime. Rope burns ringed her wrists, bruises marbled her arms and shoulders, and her breaths came shallow and uneven. Bridger boiled water, grinding herbs he kept for wounds, working with a gentleness unexpected in a man who had known so much violence. When she stirred, her voice was the scrape of dry leaves. "Where am I?" "My home," he said gruffly. "You're safe for now." She watched him with sharp, assessing eyes despite her weakness. "Why did you save me?" He wrung a cloth into a basin, unsure how to answer. Maybe because he couldn't listen to another human voice begging for help without acting. Maybe because after years of loneliness, even danger felt like a kind of company. Or maybe because something about her, her strength even in suffering, refused to let him ride away. "My name is Naeli," she whispered, once her breathing steadied. Bridger nodded, not offering his own yet. Names carried weight, and he wasn't ready to shoulder that piece of himself. "The Iron Ravens took me," she continued, swallowing hard. "They meant to sell me to a saloon in Dry Bluff. I fought, so they used me as bait." Bridger paused, cloth in hand. "Why you?" Her gaze hardened. "My father is Chief Nakoi. The Ravens believe he protects old Apache writings, maps, histories, treasures hidden for generations. Bridger felt a familiar coldness ripple through him. Maxwell. It had to be Maxwell. Cyrus Maxwell, once his commanding officer during the war. A man who'd joked over campfires and executed prisoners without blinking. A man whose cruelty had no bottom. He forced the thought aside as he handed Nayeli a cup of water. "Drink. No one can touch you here." She took it, her large hand trembling. "You should not have helped me," she warned. "They will come." Bridger checked the cylinder on his revolver, the metal catching the last flicker of lamplight. "If they come," he said, "I'll be ready." The wind howled outside, blowing out the lamp, leaving only the red glow of dying embers. In that dimness, two breaths mingled, one belonging to a man who had stopped caring whether he lived, and one belonging to a woman determined to. At dawn, the desert was still as a blade. Bridger stepped outside to water Rusty but froze. His horse, his companion for 7 years, lay dead, throat cut clean, blood dried black against the dust. On the cabin door, scorched into the wood, was the mark of the iron ravens. 2 crossed feathers burned deep by a hot blade. Bridger's fists clenched until the tendons stood out like rope. He knelt beside Rusty, touching the once warm flank, feeling old grief mingle with fresh rage. He buried the horse in silence behind the barn, each shovel of dirt heavy with the weight of memory. When he returned, Nayeli stood on the porch, hair wild from the night, her eyes dark with understanding. "They have come," she said softly. "Not yet," Bridger replied, "but they will." She stepped closer, voice steady. "If I leave alone, I die. If you take me to town, I die. But if I stay," her gaze held his, "we fight. Together." For the first time in years, something inside Bridger shifted, something that had long been numb. He nodded. "Then we get ready." The cabin became a battlefield before the fighting ever began. Bridger reinforced the windows with wooden planks, slid the heavy table to block the front door, and poured extra oil into the lamps so they could keep light through the night. Every hammer strike echoed through the desert silence like a war drum, and Nayeli worked beside him without hesitation. Her large hands swung the hammer as confidently as any frontier man, muscles flexing beneath sun-darkened skin as if she had rebuilt 100 shelters before. They worked until sweat mingled with smoke and breath turned heavy. When they finally paused, the room felt smaller, tighter, but ready. Bridger handed her a tin cup of coffee. "Tonight you sleep in the cellar," he said. "I'll keep watch." She looked toward the window where the sky had begun to bruise with oncoming storm clouds. "If they kill you," she said quietly, "I will not let a single one of them live." Bridger gave a tired half-smile. "Then it seems we share a plan." As dusk folded over the desert, Bridger showed Nayeli his small arsenal, the Colt revolver, a Winchester rifle that had seen Gettysburg, and a worn shotgun that had cleared more than a few saloons in his wilder days. His hands moved with the surety of someone who had once lived by these weapons and hated himself for how well he remembered their weight. Nayeli watched him with a sharp, unreadable gaze, her fingers brushing the revolver he handed her. 6 shots, he reminded. "When I say shoot, you don't hesitate." She responded without boast or fear. "The cavalry taught us to use guns when they tried to kill us. I learned well." Something shifted in Bridger's face, not surprise, but respect. They continued prepping the cabin, lanterns placed to cast false shadows, chairs stacked to form makeshift barriers, escape routes drawn in the dirt with deliberate strokes. Years in the Union Army had taught him preparation was the difference between life and burial. When the storm finally broke, night came alive with violence. Lightning tore across the sky, thunder rattled the cabin walls, and rain hammered the earth like angry fists. Bridger peered through a narrow slit in the boarded window and saw shapes, dark, shifting forms, moving toward them through sheets of rain. He steadied his rifle. "They're here." Nayeli moved to her position by the rear window, breathing slow and controlled. In a flash of lightning, Bridger counted 10 figures spreading out in a wide arc. The voice that followed struck him harder than any bullet. "Captain Bridger, someone called through the storm. "I know you're in there." Bridger's blood turned to ice. Maxwell. Even after 15 years, the man still used his old rank, as if he still owned him. "Bring out the Apache woman," Maxwell continued. "We can settle this peaceful-like." Bridger whispered to Nayeli, "He thinks we still have the map." "Let him think it," she replied. The storm lit up the yard again, and Maxwell's men moved in. Bridger responded with a single rifle shot that dropped the nearest raven where he stood. Chaos erupted instantly. Gunfire shattered the night, bullets tearing through wood and splintering logs. The cabin shuddered under the assault, but the reinforced walls held. Nayeli fired with deadly calm, dropping 2 men before they could reposition. Rain hissed against hot gun barrels, steam rising like ghosts from the mud. "They're circling to the back!" Bridger shouted, swinging the Winchester toward another slit. Nayeli was already moving, instincts sharp as a hawk's. She caught a shadow near the rear door and fired twice. One grunt and a body hit the ground. For 10 brutal minutes the fight raged in thunder-lit flashes. Maxwell's men, skilled killers, were thrown into confusion by the storm, the dark, and the traps Bridger had built. But the numbers were still against them, and when a flaming arrow slammed into the roof, Bridger cursed. "They're trying to burn us out." Smoke seeped through the ceiling as another arrow caught, flames licking upward despite the rain. "To the cellar," Bridger ordered. They grabbed ammunition, weapons, and descended into the darkness as fire crackled overhead. "They will suffocate us down here," Nayeli warned, her voice steady but grim. Bridger shoved aside barrels to reveal a low passage carved into the earth. "Eleanor wanted a tunnel," he said. "Fear of raids." Irony hung thick between them. He motioned to the opening. "It goes to the barn." Nayeli didn't hesitate. She crawled in, extinguishing the lantern as they moved through the dirt-scented darkness. Smoke filtered into the passage, making their breaths thin and urgent. Minutes stretched like hours before a sliver of barn floor came into view. Bridger pushed upward, breaking through loose boards into the barn's shadow. 2 ravens were inside, rifles raised in surprise at the sudden intrusion. Bridger fired first, dropping 1. The second aimed, but Nayeli was faster. Her knife flashed, slicing the man's throat before he made a sound. A third man burst from the corner and fired. The bullet grazed Bridger's shoulder, burning like molten iron before he returned fire and put the man down. Outside, shouts erupted. "More coming!" Nayeli said. Rain hammered the barn roof like war drums. Bridger gestured to the saddled horses, trembling in their stalls. "Mount up!" Within moments, they were astride 2 terrified animals, thunder booming overhead. Bridger shoved the barn doors open and they erupted into the storm like lightning unleashed. Gunfire streaked past them as they rode hard across the mud-soaked yard. Maxwell himself appeared through the haze, firing wildly, his cavalry coat whipping like a dark banner. A bullet clipped the air by Bridger's ear as he ducked low. Another grazed Nayeli's sleeve. They plunged down into the arroyo, horses sliding through the wet earth, mud exploding beneath their hooves. Lightning split the world into brief white clarity, revealing the burning cabin behind them collapsing into blackened ruin. Bridger didn't look back. Home was gone. Survival was ahead. They rode until thunder drowned out the chase and the storm cloaked their escape. Only when the desert returned to a steady drizzle did they slow, hiding beneath a stone overhang. Both were soaked, bleeding, shaking, but alive. Nayeli looked at him, rain dripping from her hair. "Maxwell will not stop." Bridger wiped blood from his shoulder. "No," he said. "But neither will I." The storm thinned into a pale mist as dawn crept over the horizon. Bridger and Nayeli rode through the desert in cold silence, both shaken by the night, but hardened for what lay ahead. The deputy's badge Burke had given him still gleamed on his vest, though it felt heavier than iron. "Silver Creek is 4 hours," he said. "We need ammunition, medicine, and fresh horses." Nayeli's eyes narrowed at the mention of town. "They will not welcome me." Bridger kept his gaze ahead. "You'll ride with me as my prisoner. Badge makes it legal enough." She stiffened at the thought, but nodded. Survival demanded compromises neither of them liked. The desert around them was washed clean by rain, every cactus dripping silver, every ridge softened by fog, but beneath the beauty lay danger. The Iron Ravens would regroup. Maxwell would rally more men. and word of their escape would spread like wildfire. When Silver Creek's false-fronted buildings appeared through the haze, neither felt relief, only tension sharpening like a blade. The moment they entered town, stairs cut into them like thrown knives. A deputy escorting an Apache woman was a sight people didn't ignore. Bridger kept his jaw tight and his hand near his revolver, riding with the calm authority expected of a lawman. He was aware of Nayeli beside him, her posture rigid, gaze low but senses sharpened to every movement. They tied their horses outside the general store. "We go in and out," Bridger murmured. Inside, the shopkeeper's eyes landed on Nayeli and froze. "Deputy," he greeted stiffly, nodding toward the badge. "What can I do for you?" Bridger slid a list across the counter. Supplies, medicine, ammunition. As the storekeeper fetched items, whispers rose among the customers. The tension thickened like humidity before a storm. A man at the back spat loudly. "Since when do we serve Apache thieves?" Bridger turned slowly, his voice cold as ice. "Since she's under my protection." He tapped the badge. The man scowled but backed down. But trouble didn't vanish. It waited. The door creaked open, and two trail-worn men stepped inside, dusty coats, hard eyes, hands too close to their holsters. Their gaze swept the store and locked onto Bridger instantly. Nayeli's posture tightened. Bridger calmly finished paying for the supplies, though his pulse sharpened. As Nayeli carried the bundles outside, the taller stranger approached him with a thin, tobacco-stained smirk. "Heard there was some excitement out at Pecos," he drawled. "Ravens got themselves killed." Bridger didn't blink. "News travels quick." The second man leaned in. "Colonel Maxwell ain't happy." Bridger felt his stomach knot. These weren't just scouts, they were messengers. "Tell Maxwell," Bridger said, stepping closer, voice low and lethal. "If he wants to collect anything from me, he can come himself." Recognition flashed in their eyes. They knew his name, and that was bad. Outside, Nayeli was already mounted, scanning rooftops and windows. Bridger joined her, but the saloon across the street erupted with 5 drunken locals who spotted Nayeli instantly. "That's one of them Apache witches!" a man roared, pointing at her. A bottle sailed through the air and shattered near their horses' hooves. Penny reared, nearly throwing Nayeli, but she steadied herself with skilled reflexes. Bridger's revolver was out before the bottle shards hit the ground. "Time to go," he barked. They spurred their horses toward the edge of town. More shouting followed, and then the crack of gunfire. Bridger turned in the saddle and fired a warning shot, sending the 2 men from the store diving for cover. It wasn't meant to kill, just to buy distance. They rode hard, dust flying beneath hooves, the desert swallowing them as Silver Creek shrank behind. Only when the town lay miles away did Bridger slow the mare. "That went well," he said dryly. Nayeli's expression was grim. "They know we live. They will come tonight, with many more." Bridger nodded, jaw tightening. "Let them." But both knew Maxwell would not send mere scouts next time. He would bring an army. They rode west toward the Pico ruins, not to stay, but to retrieve whatever they could salvage before Maxwell struck. The cabin was still smoking, collapsed into a heap of charred beams and embers that glowed faintly like dying coals. The air smelled of wet ash and destruction. Nayeli dismounted, her gaze darkening. Bridger sifted through the wreckage, finding half-melted tools, a few cartridges, and a blood-stained board where Rusty had been slain. He closed his fist around it, grief flaring anew. They dug beneath a floorboard that still clung to structure and recovered the map fragment Nayeli had hidden before the fire. "Maxwell will have his own piece," she murmured. "He won't stop until he has the whole map." Bridger studied her, seeing the silent despair hidden beneath her steady tone. "Then we reach Eagle Cave first," he said. "Find the texts, move them somewhere safe." Nayeli hesitated. "It is Apache territory. My people may not welcome you." Bridger holstered his Colt. "I'm not looking for welcome, just justice." As they set off toward the mountains, the desert stretched behind them like a battlefield. The world felt smaller now, reduced to 2 riders, a map, an obsession of a mad colonel, and the fragile hope that somewhere ahead lay safety, or at least a chance to fight on their own terms. Bridger looked at Nayeli as the sun dipped behind jagged rock formations. turning the sky blood orange. "Tell me about Chief Nakohe," he said. "Your father." She rode for a moment before answering. "He leads with wisdom, but the white world has taken much from him. Soldiers burned our hunting grounds. Raven scouts stole my sister." Her voice tightened. "Kaya is 16. Bridger swallowed. A girl barely older than his daughter would have been. "We'll find her," he said. "Alive." Naeli turned, meeting his eyes. For the first time he saw something beyond rage or grief, something like belief. "Yes," she whispered. "We will." The journey into the mountains grew harsher as daylight faded. The land shifted from red dust mesas into jagged cliffs carved by centuries of wind. Shadows stretched long between the pines, and the air grew sharper, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant streams. Bridger's shoulder throbbed with each jolt of the saddle, but he ignored the pain, focusing on their surroundings. Naeli moved with quiet confidence, pointing out hidden paths and markings left by passing animals or Apache hunters. By nightfall, they reached a sheltered hollow surrounded by rock walls that broke the wind. They made a small fire, small enough not to be seen from afar, and shared a meager meal of coffee, jerky, and hardtack. "Maxwell's men are clever," Naeli warned, staring into the flames. "He will send scouts ahead, maybe even traitors among my people who joined him for money." Bridger thought of the Apache scout he had killed at the ravine. "A man who betrays his own will meet a traitor's death," he said quietly. Naeli nodded, but her eyes dimmed with sorrow. Betrayal among her people hurt her more deeply than bullets or torture. The next morning, they reached a vantage point overlooking Coyote Springs, a small trading post tucked against a rocky ridge. Bridger studied it through a spyglass. 3 horses I don't recognize. Could be Maxwell's men. Naeli crouched beside him. "Jacobs owns the Blue Roan. The paint belongs to his wife. The others." Her jaw tightened. "Strangers." Bridger decided he would go alone. With the deputy badge pinned to his vest, he could move more freely than an Apache woman. "You stay hidden," he told her. "If I'm not out by an hour, ride north." Naeli glared. "I will not abandon you." He placed a hand on her shoulder, firm but not harsh. "This isn't about bravery. It's strategy." After a tense moment, she relented. Bridger rode down to the trading post, adopting the steady posture of a frontier lawman. Inside, the shop smelled of dust, leather, and old tobacco. Several men sat around a pot-bellied stove, sipping coffee. All conversation stopped when Bridger walked in. Jacobs, the proprietor, greeted him with cautious respect. Bridger ordered supplies, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. 2 men at the back exchanged a glance at the mention of iron ravens. Their hands hovered too close to their guns, their eyes too sharp. When Bridger mentioned Maxwell's name, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet. As Jacobs fetched medical supplies, the 2 strangers approached, casual in posture but deadly in intent. "You riding alone, deputy?" one asked. Bridger kept his expression unfazed. "Marshal Burke's got men spread thin." The first man smirked. "Shame. Colonel Maxwell's missing a few boys. Maybe you seen 'em?" Bridger smiled thinly. "Can't say I have." But his hand lowered toward his holster. When Jacobs returned with the supplies, the strangers drew. Bridger moved instantly, dropping the sack, diving sideways, firing before his boots hit the floorboards. 1 raven fell dead. The other staggered back, wounded but still aiming. Before he could fire again, the window shattered inward as Naeli appeared, Winchester raised. Her shots were quick and precise. 2 flashes of heat and smoke, and the second raven collapsed. Silence swallowed the room, broken only by Jacob's muttered curse. "You sure know how to stir trouble, deputy." Bridger holstered his gun, retrieved the supplies, and approached the wounded raven slumped against the wall. "Where's Maxwell?" he demanded. The man spat blood, a red froth glistening in the dim light. "Coming, with everything he's got. No escape." He died, grinning. Outside, Naeli already had fresh horses saddled. Jacobs grudgingly offered them supplies and warned, "Maxwell's camped at 3 Fingers Rock. Got near 20 men." Bridger paid him and left a message for Marshal Burke in hopes reinforcements would come, but neither expected any salvation soon. Bridger and Naeli mounted their fresh horses and continued north, leaving the trading post behind like a fading memory. The mountains swallowed them as dusk settled across the land, cold wind threading through the pines like whispered warnings. Nayeli grew more confident as the land shifted into Apache territory. She moved swiftly, guiding them along hidden trails, avoiding valleys where sound carried too easily. They camped under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed like pinpricks in a black hide. Bridger tended his shoulder, now bound with fresh herbs Nayeli had chewed into a medicinal paste. "You heal fast," she observed. "Apache medicine works better than white man's bottles." He let out a quiet laugh. "I'll take your word for it." For a moment, the world softened, but dawn came with danger. As they rode through a forested ridge, twigs snapped, deliberate, controlled. Not animals, men. Bridger reached for his rifle, but Nayeli lifted a hand. A voice called out in Apache. 3 warriors emerged from the shadows, painted for hunting, moving with silent authority. The leader, Makia, looked between Bridger and Nayeli, suspicion etched in every line of his face. Nayeli spoke with urgency, explaining their flight, Maxwell's pursuit, and the sacred texts. Makia gestured toward Bridger, asking something sharp and unforgiving. Nayeli translated quietly. "He asks why you help our people." Bridger didn't hesitate. "Because Maxwell has to be stopped," he said, "and because wrong is wrong no matter whose land it happens on." Makia studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Come," he said in careful English, "to our camp. Chief Nakohe will decide." Guided by the warriors, Bridger and Nayeli rode deeper into the mountains until firelight flickered through the trees. A hidden Apache camp spread across a sheltered valley, women preparing food, men tending horses, children playing in quiet tones. But every eye turned sharp the moment the white man entered. Chief Nakohe emerged from the largest wickiup, tall and dignified, his presence commanding without effort. Nayeli bowed her head in respect. They spoke rapidly in Apache, the air thick with emotion. Then Nakohe turned to Bridger. "You saved my daughter," the chief said in low, measured English. "For this, you have my gratitude." But his eyes glittered with warning. "You also bring iron ravens to our doorstep." Bridger met the chief's gaze without flinching. "I didn't choose Maxwell's path, but I won't let him destroy your people." Nakohe gestured to the council fire. "Sit. We speak of sacred things tonight." Around the flames, elders gathered, their faces solemn. Bridger explained Maxwell's pursuit, the map fragment, and the danger to Eagle Cave. When Nayeli added that Kaya, her younger sister, was alive but held in Maxwell's camp, murmurs rippled through the council. "Eagle Cave holds our history," Nakohe said. "Burial treasures, writings of our ancestors. If Maxwell reaches them first, he will desecrate everything." The chief studied Bridger in silence. "You are not Apache," he said finally, "but you fight as though our loss is your own." Bridger bowed his head. "Some things are worth fighting for." After a long deliberation, Nakohe rose. "Then you will prove your honor. Tomorrow at dawn, you and Nayeli will travel with my son Tanito to Eagle Cave. Recover the sacred texts before Maxwell finds them. And then," his expression darkened, "we will free Kaya." Bridger felt the weight of the task settle upon him, not fear but purpose, something he had lacked for too long. That night he lay awake on a bed of woven hides, listening to the faint murmur of drums and voices outside. Nayeli visited him once, placing a hand on his arm without a word. In that quiet touch, he understood. They were no longer just allies. They were bound by fate, by blood spilled, by battles won and still to come. And tomorrow, they would descend into the heart of sacred ground, with Maxwell's shadow not far behind. Dawn arrived shrouded in mist, pale light slipping through the pines like cautious fingers. Bridger rose before the Apache camp stirred, instinct guiding him as much as habit. His leg ached from the graze, his shoulder from the bullet, but old wounds had taught him long ago that pain meant nothing compared to purpose. Nayeli approached with Tanito at her side, both armed and prepared. The young warrior regarded Bridger with wary determination, clearly not convinced the white outsider deserved to walk among them, but he led the way without complaint. Their small group set off from camp, weaving through winding forest trails that only Apache feet could navigate with ease. Bridger followed, every sense alert. He could feel Maxwell somewhere beyond those ridges, slithering through the land like a venomous serpent, wounded yet still deadly. As they climbed, the scent of sage and stone thickened, and the sound of distant waterfalls echoed through the canyon walls. "Eagle Cave is ahead," Nayeli said quietly. "Once we enter, we must move quickly. Maxwell will not delay long." The canyon narrowed into jagged walls before widening again into a silent basin where ancient stones stood tall like forgotten guardians. The cave entrance was almost invisible, hidden by a curtain of hanging brush and rock shadow. Tanito raised a hand, signaling a stop. "A watcher," he murmured. Bridger strained his eyes until he spotted the faint silhouette of a man against the canyon ridge. Before he could speak, Tanito slipped into the shadows, bow drawn. Minutes passed until a soft thud echoed across the ridge. Tanito returned wordlessly. With danger cleared, they approached the cave, a cool breath of ancient air greeting them from the dark. Inside, torchlight revealed centuries of Apache history etched into stone, painted hunts, spirit animals, journeys across deserts and mountains. The deeper chambers shimmered with mineral deposits that caught the flame like starlight, but the fourth chamber froze them in place. Bootprints, cigar ash, a torn piece of cloth. Maxwell's men had been here. "But they didn't find the vault," Tanito whispered, moving to the wall carved with sacred markings. He pressed specific symbols in a ritual sequence learned only by the chief's bloodline. Slowly, stone ground against stone as a hidden door opened, revealing a narrow passage descending into the earth. The sacred chamber was breathtaking. A central platform held dozens of deerskin scrolls, each tied with sinew, surrounded by elaborate copper and turquoise offerings. Every object carried the soul of Apache ancestors, their battles, visions, prayers. Even Bridger felt the air shift, as if the spirits themselves watched in silence. Nayeli bowed deeply. "These are the stories of our people," she whispered, "their lives, their wisdom." They worked quickly, securing the scrolls and the most precious offerings. Bridger handled each with reverence, aware that history itself passed through his hands. But before they finished, voices echoed from the outer chambers, shouts, boots, guns being cocked. Maxwell's advance party had returned. "We must leave now," Tanito hissed. He guided them to a hidden crawl space in the wall that only those born of Apache blood knew existed. They squeezed through the narrow stone throat and emerged onto a concealed ledge halfway up the canyon wall. Below, 6 ravens entered the cave from the front, rifles raised. "They'll find the empty vault soon," Bridger warned. "We need distance." They descended quietly along a narrow trail carved into the rock. But halfway down, a raven spotted movement. Gunfire erupted, echoing like thunder through the canyon. Tanito returned fire, dropping one. Bridger fired next. Another fell. But the remaining ravens mounted their horses and gave chase, riding hard along the canyon floor. They reached the hiding place where their mounts were tethered, vaulted into their saddles, and raced into the high forest. The chase stretched into twilight, bullets slicing past, branches snapping beneath hooves, shouts rising behind them. Bridger's leg burned, but he forced the mare onward. Nayeli rode fiercely beside him, her braids whipping in the wind. When the ravens gained ground, Bridger made a decision. "We split," he shouted. "Tanito, take the texts to your father. Nayeli and I will draw them off." Tanito protested, but Nayeli threw him a commanding glance. He understood, nodded once, and veered north through rocky terrain that only Apache horses could navigate. Bridger and Nayeli thundered east, deliberately kicking up loose shale, making a trail loud enough for the ravens to follow. Soon the shouts behind them turned in their direction. "They follow us," Nayeli said, breathless. "Good," Bridger answered. "Let them." But they could not outrun forever. The land grew steep, funneling them into a narrow ravine. It was a perfect ambush point. Nayeli indicated a split in the ravine wall, a small ledge overlooking the path. They climbed it noiselessly, took cover behind boulders, and waited. Moonlight painted the ravine silver as 6 riders appeared below, single file. Bridger fired first, hitting the Apache traitor in the lead. Nayeli's rifle cracked next. Chaos exploded. Riders scrambled. Gunfire sparked against stone. Horses reared. 3 fell before the others retreated in panic. 2 fled toward the east. The ravine went silent, but for the echo of hoofbeats fading into darkness. Bridger's thigh bled heavily now, soaking his trousers. Nayeli hurried to him, tearing fabric to bind the wound. "We must move," she urged. "More will come." Pain dulled his vision, but he pushed himself onto his feet. They rode through the night, exhaustion hollowing their faces, until dawn finally warmed the treetops. Near Spider Creek, the first sign of home appeared, smoke rising peacefully beyond the ridge. Relief washed over them. But as they crested the hill, a bullet whistled past Bridger's head. His horse screamed and collapsed beneath him. Nayeli's mare reared violently, throwing her to the mud. Ravens burst from the trees, 8 of them, rifles blazing. Bridger dragged Nayeli behind a fallen log as bullets ripped bark inches from them. Then a familiar voice cut through the gunfire. Maxwell, standing tall in his blood-stained cavalry coat. "It ends today, Bridger," he roared. "Come out and die like a soldier." Bridger felt old rage funnel through him like flame. "Come take me yourself," he shouted back. Gunfire exploded again. They were pinned, outnumbered, and low on ammunition. Bridger knew what he had to do. "Run for the camp," he whispered to Nayeli. "Warn your father." She refused instantly. "No." Bridger took her hand, gripping tight. "If they kill me, everything I've done means nothing. Go." He fired wildly to draw attention, then broke from cover, running through the trees with bullets shattering soil at his feet. Maxwell bellowed for his men to follow. Nayeli hesitated only a moment before sprinting toward the camp. Bridger ducked behind a pine trunk, reloading with shaking hands. Maxwell's men advanced, sticks cracking beneath their boots. Then a high-pitched cry sliced the air, the Apache war cry. Warriors surged from the forest edge, descending upon the ravens with blinding speed. Nayeli had reached them in time. The battle was short and brutal. Apache arrows flew, tomahawks cleaved, rifles cracked, ravens fell one by one. Maxwell fired into the chaos, bleeding from his shoulder wound, reopened by Bridger's earlier shot. He saw Bridger across the clearing and aimed his revolver. Bridger raised his Winchester. A single shot rang out, not Bridger's nor Maxwell's. Tonito stood behind Maxwell, his arrow buried deep in the colonel's spine. Maxwell staggered, turned, and fell face first into the creek. The threat that had haunted all 3 of their lives ended in the cold mountain water. With Maxwell dead, the remaining ravens were hunted down or fled into the wilderness. Apache warriors retrieved Kaya from a hidden tent within Maxwell's camp, bruised, shaken, but alive. The sisters embraced with tears and fierce relief. Bridger swayed from blood loss, but Nayeli caught him, lowering him gently to the ground. Back at camp, Chief Nakohe tended Bridger's wounds himself. "You have earned honor among us," the chief said. "Few white men ever touch it." 3 days later, Apache scouts brought confirmation. Maxwell's body had been found by a ravine. His remaining map lay beside him, torn and useless. The Iron Ravens disbanded, their terror dissolved like dust in the wind. Marshal Burke came with a handful of lawmen, astonished to see Bridger alive and allied with the Apache. Talks of peace began. The Apache prepared new secret places for the sacred texts. And Bridger. He found something he had not felt in years: belonging. That evening, Bridger and Nayeli sat on a grassy knoll overlooking the valley, watching children chase fireflies. Kaya laughed with them, free again. Bridger held the deputy badge in one hand, turning it thoughtfully. "Burke wants me to come back," he said quietly. "Wear the badge. Keep the peace." Nayeli's voice was soft. "And what do you want?" Bridger looked at the horizon, rolling hills, pines whispering like old friends, smoke from Apache fires curling peacefully upward. "I think," he said slowly, "I want to build something again. A home. A life." Nayeli reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "Then build it here," she said, "with me." The stars came out slowly, like shy candles in the vast dark. For the first time in many years, Bridger felt the future open before him, not as a burden or a battlefield, but as a promise. Together, they would build a new home at the edge of 2 worlds. And in the quiet of that mountain night, Silas Bridger finally understood what had been missing all his life: peace found not in solitude, but in a woman who had fought her way back from the noose and the people who welcomed him despite his past.